The orbital academy of Zenthar 9 floated silently above a blue nebula, its silver halls shining like glass under the light of distant suns. Inside, hundreds of students from different worlds gathered in a grand lecture hall, waiting for their most exciting class of the term, Deathworld Biology. The hall buzzed with the sounds of chittering, clicking, and whispering in dozens of alien languages. The air smelled faintly of ozone and strange flowers from distant planets. These students had come from peaceful worlds where danger was rare, where nature was kind and predictable. They studied the creatures of Deathworlds, planets so violent and wild that most life could not survive there, out of pure curiosity. Among them were insect-like Yiln with shining carapaces, crystal-bodied Virith that glimmered when they moved, and the liquid-skinned Solari who shimmered like water in sunlight. At the front stood Professor Zakar, a tall, many-legged creature whose chitin gleamed darkly. His long antennae twitched as he activated the holographic projector, filling the air with swirling images of monstrous beasts. "Today," he began in a slow, deliberate voice, "we discuss the most dangerous creatures in all the known systems, the inhabitants of the planet Earth." A sudden tension filled the room. Every student fell quiet. Even the air filters seemed to hush. The name itself carried fear. Earth, a world known across the galaxy as a Class 13 death world, a place of storms, volcanoes, diseases, and endless conflict. Many of the students had heard stories about it, stories of savage creatures that hunted for sport, of unpredictable weather that could wipe out entire species, and of intelligent predators that had once nearly destroyed themselves with their own weapons. Some whispered that Earth was cursed. Others called it the planet of madness. Professor Zakar continued, showing holograms of humans, strange, hairless bipeds with forward-facing eyes and bare hands. "These are called humans," he explained. "They are omnivorous primates, fragile in body but extremely adaptable. Their species has survived every form of natural disaster and continues to exist despite their own violent history. They are clever, unpredictable, and—" He was suddenly interrupted by a sound, a short, dry cough from the back of the hall. The professor stopped, confused. The students turned their heads. Sitting near the corner of the lecture hall was a tall figure wearing the plain gray uniform of the academy. He raised his hand slowly. His voice was calm, steady, and strangely deep. "Sir," he said, "you might want to update that data. Some of us are still around." For a long second, no one moved. The entire hall seemed frozen. Even the holograms flickered in silence. Then the figure stood up. His face was smooth-skinned, his hair dark, his eyes sharp, alive with something fierce and human. "Name's Jack Calder," he said quietly. "Earthborn." The reaction was instant. A wave of shock rippled through the crowd. The Yiln clattered their claws nervously. The Virith dimmed their glowing bodies and the Solari shivered like ripples on water. Fear filled the air. Whispers spread from seat to seat. A Deathworlder. "Here? How is that possible?" They let one of them in, but Jack didn't flinch. He just looked at them, calm, steady, unafraid, as if their fear meant nothing. Professor Zakar's mandibles clicked in disbelief. He had spent his life teaching about the monsters of Earth, but he had never imagined he would one day face one in his classroom. The silence stretched until finally Jack smiled. A small human smile that seemed both friendly and dangerous. For the first time in the history of the Academy, the lesson on Deathworld creatures was no longer just theory, because one of those creatures was sitting among them, breathing the same air, ready to show them what a human truly was. The days after the shocking revelation were filled with unease. The once busy halls of the Orbital Academy turned quiet whenever Jack Calder walked by. Students who once laughed together in groups now split apart at his approach, whispering in nervous tones. Some stared with open curiosity, others with fear. The insectoid Yiln twitched their antennae and scuttled away, muttering about cursed bloodlines. The crystal-bodied Virith dimmed their lights and avoided eye contact. Even the soft and kind Solari glided to the far end of the classroom when Jack entered. He didn't seem to mind. He moved through the academy with calm confidence, always early to class, always focused on his work. While others saw a monster, he behaved like any normal student. During lectures, he listened carefully, scribbling notes in a small pad. When the professors described predators that could tear through steel, Jack would simply nod, as if he understood them in a way others could not. When lessons discussed survival instincts, he stayed silent, because he knew what real survival meant. He had lived it. Despite the cold stares and fearful whispers, there was one who dared to speak to him, a Solari student named Thierry. Her body shimmered with soft blue light, and her voice was gentle like water flowing over stones. One afternoon, while everyone else kept their distance, she approached Jack in the study hall. "Is it true," she asked, her tone unsure, "that your kind fought wars against each other for thousands of years?" Jack looked up from his notes. His brown eyes seemed to carry the weight of ages. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned toward the large observation window where the endless stars stretched into forever. "Yeah," he said finally, his voice quiet. "We did, but we learned from it. Most of the time." His words hung in the air like something heavy and sad. Thierry nodded slowly as if trying to understand. Before she could ask more, a deep alarm suddenly echoed through the academy. The lights flickered red. A robotic voice blared through the intercom, cold and urgent. "Warning! Unknown vessels approaching. Shields failing. All students to secure positions immediately." Panic spread instantly. Students shouted in confusion. Some fled the room, others froze in fear. The ground trembled as explosions rumbled through the outer hull. Professor Zakar stormed into the hallway, shouting for order, but his voice was drowned by the sound of another impact. The windows flashed with bursts of light. Enemy ships had arrived, dark and spined like living nightmares. "It's the Karn Horde!" Someone screamed. "They'll destroy us!" The professor's face turned pale. "We have no weapons." "No defenses." The students clung to each other, terrified. The academy was a research station, not a military base. They had no way to fight off raiders. But then, from among the chaos, a calm voice spoke. "Not if we stop them first." All heads turned. Jack stood in the center of the room, his expression steady and unreadable. Smoke drifted around him as the emergency lights flashed across his face. There was no fear in his eyes, only focus. "We can't just sit here," he said firmly. "If we do nothing, they'll kill us all. We have tools, drones, power systems. We can use them." The others stared at him in disbelief. No one had ever heard someone speak like that in the face of such danger. Thierry stepped closer, her body glowing faintly. You mean to fight them?" she asked softly. Jack gave a small nod. "On Earth, you either fight or you die." The words struck everyone like a pulse of electricity. Around him, the frightened students began to move, drawn by his certainty. Even Professor Zakar hesitated, unsure what to do as the human, the Deathworlder, began taking command. Outside, the dark ships of the Karn Horde closed in, their weapons glowing with deadly light. Inside, the being everyone had feared was now their only hope. The orbital academy of Zenthar 9 was never built for war. It was a place of learning, filled with quiet libraries, research labs, and peaceful students who had never even seen a real weapon before. But to Jack Calder, the human from Earth, everything inside that station looked like a potential tool. Where others saw weakness, he saw opportunity. As the station shook under the Karn Horde's first attack, Jack rushed through the trembling corridors, his boots pounding against the floor. Behind him followed Thierry and a small group of terrified students. The air was filled with the sound of alarms and distant explosions. Red warning lights painted the walls like streaks of blood. "We need power to the shields and something to shoot back with," Jack said quickly, his voice firm and calm. "Thierry, get me access to the maintenance network. He pointed to a Yiln student. "Reroute the drone hangar's power grid." The alien stammered, his antennae twitching in panic. "But they are not made for battle. They are for repairs and cleaning." Jack's lips curved into a small, confident smile. "Then we'll make them fight." The group stared at him as if he was mad, but something in his tone made them obey. They ran through the narrow tunnels that smelled of metal and ozone, sparks flying from broken panels. The station trembled again, throwing them off balance. "They're boarding!" someone shouted behind them. Jack didn't stop. He tore open a control panel and began rewiring circuits with his bare hands. His fingers moved fast, his mind calculating with perfect focus. "On Earth," he said without looking up, "we learned how to fix things under fire. No time for manuals, just instinct." His hands sparked with blue light as the system came alive. Power rerouted. "Thierry, start up the drones," she called out. The hangar doors opened with a hiss, and hundreds of maintenance drones floated out. Small machines with mechanical arms and repair tools. Jack reprogrammed their systems to change their protocols. Instead of patching metal, they now armed their cutters and welding torches for attack. A moment later, the drones swarmed toward the enemy ships like a cloud of angry insects. Through the observation glass, students watched in awe as the small silver machines tore into the Karn boarding craft, slicing through their hulls with blinding light. The invaders tried to shoot them down, but the drones were too fast, darting and weaving through the explosions. Inside the command center, Professor Zikar and the other staff stared at the battle unfolding outside. He turned maintenance drones into weapons, the professor said in disbelief. In minutes. The Virith engineer beside him nodded slowly, its crystal body glowing faintly. He's a Deathworlder, it said softly. They are born to adapt. Back in the hangar, Jack watched the data feed as more enemy signals appeared. His jaw tightened. They're not giving up. That first wave was just a test. He turned to the frightened students gathered behind him. Listen to me. We can't run. If they breach the main decks, they'll kill everyone. But we still have time to fight back. The group looked uncertain, their alien eyes full of fear. We're scientists, not soldiers, one of them whispered. Jack met their gaze. Doesn't matter, he said simply. You don't have to be soldiers. You just have to be survivors. His words struck something inside them, a spark of courage. The same beings who had once seen him as a monster now looked at him like a leader. They followed as he ran toward the next control point, ready to hold the line. Outside, the drones clashed with the Karn ships in bursts of fire and metal. And deep inside the academy, a new kind of lesson began. One not found in any textbook, but in the heart of a human who refused to surrender. The first breach came like thunder. The walls of the orbital academy split open under the force of a plasma charge, and the Karn horde poured through the smoke. They were monsters of metal and flesh, taller than any humanoid, their armor gleaming black and their eyes burning with cruel light. The air filled with the hiss of plasma fire and the screams of frightened students. The once peaceful halls turned into a war zone, filled with broken glass, burning panels, and drifting debris. Jack Calder moved through the chaos like a storm. He had found an old pulse rifle from a fallen security officer and held it with the familiarity of someone who had used one before. His face was streaked with soot, his expression cold and sharp. "Everyone behind cover!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the panic. "Aim for the joints and their armor's weakest there." The students scrambled behind overturned tables and broken walls. Jack took position at the front, firing precise bursts at the invading Karn. The weapon hummed with blue light, sending bolts of plasma into the enemy ranks. A towering Karn soldier roared and charged forward, swinging its blade-like arm. Jack rolled aside, came up to one knee and fired a shot straight into its throat. The creature fell with a heavy thud, shaking the floor. "How are you not afraid?" Thierry called out from behind a console, her shimmering body trembling as she fired a small energy pistol. Jack reloaded calmly and replied without turning, "Because fear doesn't help you aim." His voice was steady, but his heart raced. Still, he had learned long ago that panic was a killer. The only way to survive was to think, to act, to move. Around him, the frightened students began to find courage. They followed his orders, taking shots where he pointed, sealing doors and redirecting power to defend the inner decks. Every second counted. The Karn were powerful, but they had never faced enemies like this. Desperate students led by a Deathworlder who refused to die. The hall shook again as another wave of raiders broke through. Jack barked more orders. "Seal Deck 6. Flood the maintenance tunnels with coolant. Don't let them reach the reactors." The students obeyed without question now. Even Professor Zikar, who had once lectured about the dangers of humans, was helping reroute power with shaking hands. The alien minds around Jack began to understand something they had never seen before. What it meant to fight like a human. To adapt, to resist, to turn fear into action. Jack moved through the hallways with controlled fury, using every bit of cover, every angle, every trick his instincts offered. When his rifle overheated, he grabbed a Karn blade and kept fighting. When ammo ran low, he led the students in using improvised weapons, tools, cables, even sharp fragments of metal. The battle raged for what felt like hours. Smoke and sparks filled the corridors, bodies of fallen Karn scattered across the floor. Jack's uniform was torn and bloodied, his arms burned, but his eyes still blazed with determination. The aliens who once feared him now looked at him with awe. He was everything they had learned to fear about Deathworlders, and everything they now needed to survive. The last wave of the attack slowed, their numbers thinning under the relentless defense. The Karn commander, a giant creature covered in jagged armor, roared in frustration as Jack stood before it, breathing hard, his rifle raised. "You should have stayed away from this station," Jack said coldly. The commander lunged, swinging its blade, but Jack dodged and fired 3 quick shots straight into its chest. The creature fell, smoking and still. Silence fell over the corridor. The surviving students stared at Jack, stunned. The fires flickered in the broken hall, and for a moment the only sound was the hum of distant alarms. Jack lowered his weapon slowly and turned to the group. "We're not done yet," he said quietly. "They'll send more. But now they know we can fight. And in that instant, the students of the Orbital Academy understood the truth of humanity. Not their brutality, but their strength, their will to survive, and the unbreakable fire that burned in every Deathworlder's heart. The battle had turned the Orbital Academy into a graveyard of steel and fire. Whole sections of the station drifted in ruins, spinning slowly in the darkness of space. The air inside was thin, filled with smoke and sparks. Gravity flickered on and off, making everything float in eerie silence before slamming down again. The once glorious symbol of learning had become a battlefield. Jack Calder stood in the command deck, his uniform torn and his shoulder bleeding from a plasma wound. Around him were the few survivors: Thierry, Professor Zakar, and a handful of terrified students who had fought beside him since the first attack. They were exhausted, trembling, but alive. Through the cracked window, they could see the Karn flagship looming outside like a dark planet, its massive cannon glowing as it charged for the final strike. "They're going to finish us," whispered one of the students, her voice breaking. "There's no way out." Thierry turned to Jack, her luminous body dimming. "We can't win," she said softly, almost pleading. "There are too many of them." Jack didn't answer right away. He stared at the red targeting lights flashing across the stars, then slowly smiled. Not with joy, but with grim resolve. "Maybe we can't win," he said, "but we can make sure they never forget us." He stepped to the control panel, pulling up a holographic map of the station. It flickered, showing damaged decks, collapsed corridors, and the unstable fusion core buried deep inside. "If we overload the core," he said, his voice calm but heavy, "it'll trigger a chain reaction. The explosion will vaporize their flagship and take out the rest of the fleet." Silence filled the room. Everyone understood what that meant. The Virith engineer's crystal body dimmed as it spoke, its voice shaking. "The core can only be triggered manually. Someone has to stay behind." Jack nodded slowly. "I know." For a moment, no one breathed. Thierry stepped forward, her shimmering hands trembling. "Jack, no. You can't. You saved us. Let me do it." He shook his head, smiling faintly. "You're a scientist, Thierry. You're the one who'll tell the story. Make sure they know what happened here." He reached out and gently touched her shoulder. "Let them remember humans for what we really are." His words carried a strange warmth, something that filled the room despite the cold metal around them. The others wanted to argue, but deep down they knew he had already made his choice. He turned away and picked up his rifle, walking toward the damaged hallway that led to the reactor chamber. The floor trembled beneath his boots and sparks rained from the ceiling. Behind him, Thierry's voice cracked as she whispered, "Goodbye, Deathworlder." Jack didn't look back. "Goodbye, friend." The journey to the core was chaos, fire, smoke, and the screams of metal tearing apart. The Karn had breached the lower decks, their monstrous forms still fighting to destroy what remained. Jack moved through the wreckage like a ghost, firing when he had to, pushing forward even as pain burned through his wounded arm. His breathing grew heavy, but he didn't stop. Every step was fueled by the same instinct that had carried his kind through every war, every disaster, every impossible moment. The will to survive by ensuring others did too. When he finally reached the reactor chamber, the walls glowed with unstable energy. The console sparked violently, warning alarms flashing across the screens. He typed in the manual override, his fingers moving steadily. His helmet's comm crackled with Thierry's voice. "Jack, the Karn fleet is closing in. You have seconds." He smiled faintly. "That's all I need." For a moment, he looked out through the viewport at the endless stars. Somewhere far away was Earth, blue, wild, alive. "For Earth," he whispered softly. "For all of you." His hand hovered over the final switch, then pressed down. The world went white. A brilliant wave of light tore through the darkness, swallowing everything in silence. From orbit, the explosion looked like a newborn star, burning bright against the void. And in that moment, the Karn fleet was gone, wiped out by the courage of one human who refused to surrender. The light of the explosion burned across the void like a second sun, and when it faded, there was nothing left but silence. The Orbital Academy of Zenthar 9 was gone, reduced to drifting fragments and glowing dust. The Karn fleet had been completely destroyed, their great warships torn apart by the force of the blast. For long moments, space itself seemed to hold its breath. Hours later, rescue ships arrived from nearby systems, their scanners searching through the debris. They found broken metal, burned fragments of walls, and faint signals from life pods drifting in the cold darkness. Among the survivors was Thierry, the Solari. her body cracked and dim but still alive. She floated inside a damaged pod, clutching a small datapad against her chest. Her faint light flickered as the rescue crew pulled her aboard. The ship's medic, a soft-voiced being from the planet Nor, tried to help her stand, but Tiri's eyes were fixed on the datapad. "Please," she whispered weakly, her voice trembling like ripples on water. "Take this to the council. It's his message." The medic nodded, confused but gentle, and carried her to the infirmary. When she was stable, the captain of the rescue ship came to see her. "Who was he?" the captain asked softly. "The one who sent this?" Tiri looked out the window at the field of drifting light where the academy had once been. Her glow brightened faintly as she spoke. "His name was Jack Calder. He was from Earth." The captain hesitated. "From the Deathworld?" Tiri nodded. "Yes, the one we were all taught to fear." The datapad was opened in the central hall of the ship, and Jack's recorded voice filled the air. It was calm, steady, and carried a strange warmth that silenced everyone who listened. "If anyone finds this," he said, "don't fear humans. We may come from a death world, but that's what made us strong. We don't break easy. We don't surrender. And when the galaxy calls us monsters, remember, sometimes monsters are what you need." When the message ended, the silence in the room was heavy with emotion. The crew members looked at one another, and for the first time none of them thought of Earth as a cursed place. They thought of the human who had stood against an army and given his life so others could live. Tiri watched them quietly, her eyes shimmering with light. She remembered how Jack had smiled in that last moment, how he had faced death without fear. "He wasn't a monster," she whispered softly. "He was hope." In the weeks that followed, the story spread across the stars. Survivors of the attack told their tale to the Galactic Council, and soon every world in the sector knew about the human who had saved them. Statues were built in his honor on Zenthar Prime, showing a tall figure standing with a rifle in one hand and a datapad in the other, his gaze fixed on the stars. The inscription beneath read, "He came from the world we feared most, and he taught us courage." But among those who had known him, Jack's legacy was more than a statue or a name. It was the lesson he left behind, that strength was not born from power or perfection, but from the will to fight when everything seemed lost. The galaxy began to see humans differently after that day. Where once they were whispered about as dangerous creatures from a savage world, they were now spoken of with respect and awe. Generations of students at the rebuilt Orbital Academy learned about Jack Calder, the human who had turned fear into unity. And every year, on the day the Academy had fallen, they held a moment of silence under the stars. The lights dimmed, the room quieted, and someone would always say the same words. He was from Earth, the death world, but he showed us what it means to live. And somewhere, in the endless dark of space, the stars burned a little brighter, as if the universe itself remembered the human who had become its light.